the player count drop everyone keeps pointing at. Let's talk numbers because they're at the center of this conversation. Battlefield 6 peaked at roughly 747,000 concurrent players on Steam at launch. 3 months later, it's hovering around 118,000 to 120,000 at its 24-hour peak. That's an over 80% drop. On paper, that sounds catastrophic. But context matters. Those launch numbers were not normal Battlefield numbers. Battlefield 6 had one of the strongest FPS launches in years, possibly the strongest Battlefield launch ever on PC. That kind of peak sets unrealistic expectations for long-term retention. Battlefield has never been a game that sustains launch-level concurrency. Historically, it spikes hard and then falls fast. The issue isn't that the player count dropped, it's how fast it dropped and why. A strong launch built on perfect timing. One reason Battlefield 6 launched so explosively had nothing to do with Battlefield itself. The timing was perfect. Players were burned out on Call of Duty. Battlefield 2042 had lowered expectations so much that competent felt like a triumph. GTA 6 was delayed, and Battlefield finally returned to a modern setting after more than a decade. All of that created a perfect storm. Battlefield 6 didn't just release, it occupied space in the FPS market that was temporarily empty. That surge of attention inflated expectations about what Battlefield 6 could realistically sustain. When that attention faded, many interpreted the normalization as failure. Season 1. The first cracks appear. Season 1 was supposed to be the moment Battlefield 6 proved it could hold on to players. Instead, it became the point where momentum slowed dramatically. Everybody agrees that the Season 1 content didn't land. The two new maps, Blackwell Fields and Eastwood, failed to deliver what longtime Battlefield players were hoping for. Blackwell Fields in particular is criticized as flat, restrictive, and poorly suited for large-scale combined arms gameplay. Eastwood was seen as slightly better but forgettable. Not bad enough to outrage players, but not good enough to anchor a live service season. For a franchise where maps are the single most important content drop, this was a major problem. A Battlefield that started feeling smaller. One recurring criticism is that Battlefield 6 began drifting toward a Call of Duty-style experience. Smaller maps, limited vehicle usage, reduced destruction, less room for sandbox chaos. For veteran Battlefield players, that shift matters. Battlefield isn't just about shooting, it's about scale, unpredictability, and combined arms flow. When maps feel constrained, the game's identity starts to blur. Battlefield 6 isn't a bad shooter, but it sometimes doesn't feel like Battlefield. The challenge system that pushed players away. Progression systems matter more than developers often admit. In Battlefield 6, progression was heavily tied to challenges and not the fun kind. Instead of rewarding players for simply playing well, supporting their team, or mastering a class, progress became conditional. Instead of organic progression through play, players were handed what felt like a checklist. Unlocks became chores. Progress felt time-gated rather than earned. That shift subtly changes player psychology. You stop playing because you want to, and start playing because you have to. Grinding stopped feeling rewarding, it started feeling mandatory. When unlocks are locked behind narrowly defined tasks, experimentation disappears. Players stop improvising and start forcing playstyles they don't enjoy. And once progression loses its sense of purpose, players don't rage quit. They quietly log out and don't come back. If you're enjoying this breakdown, please like the video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you're still playing Battlefield 6 or if you'd like to start playing. RedSack, the free-to-play gamble. RedSack was clearly designed to be Battlefield 6's mass appeal hook. A free-to-play battle royale aimed at expanding the audience, increasing reach, and creating a live service anchor beyond traditional multiplayer. But the core Battlefield audience wasn't asking for a battle royale. While RedSack brought in around 3 million unique players, that number didn't translate into sustained engagement or meaningful retention. Exposure alone doesn't build loyalty. Worse, challenges were tied to RedSack and other modes that players didn't want to play. Instead of serving as an optional entry point, it became a requirement. That decision created friction between casual players, core multiplayer fans, and the game's progression systems. RedSack didn't kill Battlefield 6, but it also failed to justify the resources spent on it. When Arc Raiders entered the conversation, external competition played a role too. Arc Raiders launched during Battlefield 6's most vulnerable period, and it didn't just compete, it dominated attention across the genre. Timing mattered the most. Battlefield players were already frustrated with grind, bugs, and underwhelming post-launch content. Arc Raiders arrived offering something different, a gameplay loop that respected player time and felt fresh rather than familiar. It wasn't just a new game, it was a contrast. Players didn't just leave Battlefield temporarily. Many found a loop that aligned better with modern expectations. Battlefield 6 didn't have enough meaningful progression or standout content ready to counter that shift. Is Battlefield 6 actually dying? Here's where the conversation often loses perspective. Battlefield 6 still pulls over 100,000 daily concurrent players on Steam alone. Queue times are short. Matches fill consistently. That's not the behavior of a dead game. Compare that to Battlefield 2042, which dropped below 2,000 concurrent players at its lowest point. That comparison matters because it establishes a baseline for what actual failure looks like. Calling Battlefield 6 dead ignores both franchise history and the realities of player behavior post-launch. Decline does not equal collapse. It often just means stabilization. A franchise facing a bigger question. The more uncomfortable question isn't whether Battlefield 6 is dying, it's whether traditional large-scale multiplayer shooters can hold attention long-term anymore. Gameplay loops that once sustained players for years now burn out faster. Players divide their time across extraction shooters, live service games, and shorter session experiences. Expectations have changed. Battlefield 6 may not be failing outright. It may simply be exposing how difficult it is for classic multiplayer formats to remain dominant in a crowded, evolving market. What happens next actually matters. Season 2 will likely be more of the same. That's not pessimism, it's pattern recognition. The systems and content pipelines already in place suggest limited flexibility in the short term. Season 3 is where real change could happen if the developers are willing to rethink progression, scale, and content priorities. If Battlefield 6 continues delivering smaller maps, rigid progression, and modest seasonal updates, player numbers will continue to slide. But we aren't looking at a full collapse, it's just a slow shrink. Battlefield 6 isn't doomed, but momentum once lost is far harder to rebuild than it is to maintain. Final thoughts: falling off, not falling apart. So Battlefield 6 isn't dying, it's stabilizing, just not at the level people expected after an unprecedented launch. It's a solid game that corrected many of 2042's failures, but it struggles to keep players invested long-term. That's not just a Battlefield problem, it's a modern FPS problem. If this video helped, drop a like, subscribe for more Battlefield and shooter discussions, and comment where you think the game goes from here.